In the unforgiving plains of 1870s Nevada, a weathered rancher named Jesse James rode into a town where hope went to die. But when he saw a girl bound like a forgotten promise, he made a choice that would change everything. What secret did she carry, and what price would he pay to call her family? Stay tuned to find out. The sun hung low over Cotton Bend, Nevada, in the spring of 1872, casting a blood-orange glow across a town carved from dust and desperation. Saloons lined the single muddy street, their warped boards creaking under the weight of men chasing whiskey and cards. Behind one such saloon, in an alley choked with broken bottles and cigarette ash, a girl stood tethered to a splintered fence post. Her name was Lena, though no one bothered to ask. Barely 12, she was a wisp of a thing, her frame frail as a sparrow's, her bare feet caked in mud to her ankles. A tattered gray dress, thin as a flour sack, clung to her, damp from the morning's drizzle. Her wrists, bound above her head with coarse rope, bore red welts that stung with every twitch. Her hair, a tangled cascade of auburn, fell over her face, hiding eyes that hadn't dared to hope in years. The alley buzzed with a rough crowd, gamblers spitting tobacco, drifters swapping lies, women in faded dresses hurrying past. Most ignored Lena, their laughter sharp as broken glass. A few men lingered, their gazes cold or curious, betting on her fate like she was a hand of poker. "Gambler's kid," one muttered, leaning against a barrel. "Her pa's debts are deeper than the mines. She's the payoff." No one flinched. In Cotton Bend, cruelty was as common as the dust that coated every surface. Jesse James rode into town that day, his horse kicking up clouds of grit. At 40, he was a man worn by time and loss, his face etched with lines that told of winters, without warmth. His hair, black as coal with silver threads, was cropped close beneath a battered felt hat. His eyes, a stormy gray, missed nothing, though they rarely lingered on anyone. A faded brown duster hung over his lean frame, brushing. Boots scuffed from years of ranch work. His hands, calloused and scarred, gripped the reins with a quiet strength. Jesse hadn't planned to stay long, just drop off a broken plow blade at the blacksmith and grab a sack of flour. His ranch, 10 miles west, was a crumbling dream he held together with sheer will, alone since his wife's grave grew cold under the cottonwoods. As he passed the saloon, a voice cut through the din, raw and greedy. $12 for the girl. 1 week's work or keep her, your choice. She don't eat much. The speaker was a wiry man with a gambler's smirk, his yellowed teeth flashing as he yanked Lena's rope. Her head stayed bowed, her body trembling under the weight of her own arms. The crowd shifted, some drifting away, others sneering. Jesse's horse slowed, then stopped, as if it sensed the storm brewing in his chest. He dismounted, his boots sinking into the mud, and stepped closer, his shadow falling across the alley. The gambler, reeking of cheap liquor, sized him up. "She cleans, cooks a bit, stronger than she looks. Mute as a stone, won't sass you." Jesse didn't answer. His gaze locked on Lena, her sunken cheeks, her fingers curled tight against the rope. Something in him snapped, not with rage, but with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. He reached into his duster, pulling out a small pouch. Coins clinked as he counted them out. 15, he said, his voice low, steady. The gambler's eyes gleamed. 15 for the week? Permanent, Jesse said, his tone cutting through the air like a blade. But I ain't buying her. I'm clearing your debt. The crowd hushed, their murmurs fading. The gambler chuckled, tossing the rope into the dirt. "Same thing, mister." Jesse ignored him. He knelt, his pocket knife flashing as he sliced through Lena's bonds. Her arms fell and she stumbled, her knees buckling. He caught her, his grip firm but not harsh, steadying her like a fallen sparrow. Lena's eyes, a deep hazel flecked with gold, met his for a moment, wide, hollow, untrusting. She looked away. No tears. Just a silence that spoke louder than screams. Jesse stood, offering her his hand. "Come on," he said softly. She hesitated, then took it, her fingers cold as river stones. As they walked to his horse, the crowd parted, their whispers trailing like smoke. Jesse lifted her onto his mule, tying its lid to his saddle. They rode out of Cotton Bend, the town shrinking behind them, dust rising like a curtain over the past. But as the plains stretched wide and gray before them, Jesse felt the weight of what he'd done. Who was this girl, and what ghosts did she carry? What had he just invited into his broken life? The Nevada plains stretched endless and raw beyond Cotton Bend, a sea of sagebrush and red dirt, baking under the spring sun of 1872. Jesse James's ranch lay 10 miles west, a patchwork of weathered wood and stubborn hope nestled between rocky bluffs. The house, a low-slung structure of warped planks, leaned against the wind, its tin roof patched with mismatched sheets. A sagging barn stood nearby, home to a handful of scruffy chickens and a mule too old to complain. Cottonwood trees, bare from a late frost, framed the property, their skeletal branches whispering secrets to the breeze. Jesse led Lena through the crooked gate, his boots kicking up dust, her small figure trailing behind, clutching the mule's reins like a lifeline. Lena, barely 12, moved with the caution of a deer in open country. Her auburn hair, tangled and dull, hung loose, brushing her shoulders. Her hazel eyes, flecked with gold, darted across the ranch, taking in every shadow, every creak of the fence. Her gray dress, torn at the hem, flapped against her thin legs, and her bare feet left, faint prints in the dirt. She hadn't spoken since they left town, her silence a wall Jesse didn't know how to climb. He pointed to the house, his voice low but steady. "That's home. You'll sleep inside." Lena nodded, her fingers tightening on the reins, but she didn't move. Inside, the house was sparse, its air thick with the scent of wood smoke and boiled beans. A single room held a scarred table, 2 chairs, and a cot by the fireplace, its wool blanket folded with military precision. A cracked window let in slivers of light, painting the floor in uneven gold. Jesse set a dented tin bowl on the table, ladling beans from a pot simmering on the stove. "Eat," he said, sliding the bowl toward Lena. She sat, her movements slow, as if waiting for a trap. Her eyes fixed on the steam curling from the beans, her hands hovering over the spoon like it might burn her. She took a bite, then froze, her face flinching, not from heat, but from the unfamiliar warmth of food served with care. Jesse busied himself at the stove, giving her space. At 40, he was a man of few words, his black hair streaked with silver, cropped close under his battered hat. His gray eyes, sharp as flint, softened when he glanced at Lena, though he hid it behind a frown. His brown duster hung by the door, revealing a faded blue shirt tucked into worn trousers, his scarred hands betraying years of labor. He'd built this ranch alone, after his wife's fever stole her away, and the emptiness had settled into his bones. Now with Lena here, the silence felt heavier, full of questions neither dared to ask. That night, Jesse lit a lamp, its flicker casting long shadows. He pointed to the cot. "Yours." Lena stood frozen, her gaze flicking to the door. "I don't lock it," he said, reading her fear. "You're safe." She nodded, but her shoulders stayed tense, her body braced for a lie. As Jesse stepped outside to tend the mule, the stars burned cold above the bluffs. He lingered, the wind carrying coyote cries from the ridge. What had he done, bringing this wounded girl into his crumbling world? He didn't know her story, but the way she flinched at kindness told him enough. Back inside, Lena was curled on the cot, the blanket pulled tight around her. Her eyes were open, staring at the fire, her auburn hair spilling across the pillow. Jesse settled into a chair, his rifle resting nearby, not for her but for the world outside. At midnight, a floorboard creaked. Lena stood, her voice a whisper thin as a reed. "Don't put me in the barn, please." Jesse's heart twisted. "Never," he said, his tone firm. "I've been locked up too. Ain't right." She studied him, her hazel eyes searching for truth, then returned to the cot, curling smaller as if trying to vanish. Morning broke with a frost that glittered on the windows. Jesse rose early, stoking the fire, his breath visible in the chill. Lena stirred, sitting up, her hands clutching the blanket. He set a piece of hardtack on the table, its edges rough but warm. "Eat slow," he said. She tore off a piece, chewing carefully, her gaze fixed on the floor. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Thank you." The words felt like a crack in her armor, small but real. Jessie nodded, turning to the window where the bluffs glowed under the rising sun. As the day unfolded, Lena followed Jessie outside, her bare feet silent on the cold earth. He handed her a sack of corn for the chickens, her small hands trembling as she scattered it. She worked without complaint, her movements precise as if afraid to make a mistake. Jessie watched, his chest tight with a feeling he couldn't name. This girl, broken by a world he couldn't fix, was already changing the rhythm of his days. But as the wind carried whispers from Cotton Bend, he wondered what shadows would follow her here. What secrets did Lena guard, and what would it cost to keep her safe? The Nevada sun climbed high over Cotton Bend in the spring of 1872, its light spilling across Jesse James's ranch like molten gold. The air carried the sharp tang of sagebrush and the faint cluck of chickens scratching in the dirt. The ranch, a stubborn outpost of weathered wood and leaning fences, stood quiet under the watchful eyes of the cottonwood trees, their branches just beginning to bud. Inside the small house, Lena moved with a purpose she hadn't shown in town. At 12, she was still a wisp, her auburn hair tied back with a scrap of twine, her hazel eyes bright but guarded. Her gray dress, now patched at the knees, swayed as she swept the floor, her bare feet silent on the worn planks. She scrubbed the stove until it gleamed, folded her blanket twice each morning as if order could keep her fears at bay. Jesse watched her from the doorway, his 40 years etched in the lines of his sun-weathered face. His black hair, silver-threaded, was tucked under his battered felt hat, and his gray eyes held a quiet intensity. A faded blue shirt clung to his lean frame, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing scarred forearms from years of wrestling the land. He'd given Lena tasks, feeding chickens, fetching water, not to burden her, but to give her a place in this patchwork life. She worked diligently, her small hands quick, but her eyes darted to the door whenever a shadow passed, as if expecting the gambler's rope to return. Days turned to weeks and a fragile rhythm took root. Mornings began with Jesse baking bread, his loaves dense but warm, the scent filling the house like a promise. Lena ate slowly, savoring each bite, her hazel eyes softening as she learned to trust the food wouldn't vanish. One dawn, she lingered, at the table, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood. "My brother used to steal bread," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He's gone now." Jesse paused, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. He didn't press, just nodded, letting her words settle like dust after a storm. Outside, Lena followed Jesse as he mended fences, her steps light but steady. When she stumbled on a rock, scraping her knee, she bit her lip and kept walking. Jesse handed her a rag, his voice low. "Ain't no shame in hurtin'." She wiped the blood, her nod small but resolute. That evening, he found a wilted desert flower, yellow brittle, placed on the unmarked grave behind the barn where his wife rested. Lena stood nearby, her auburn hair catching the sunset. "For her," she said, not meeting his gaze. Jesse's throat tightened, but he only nodded, the gesture heavy with unspoken thanks. The ranch wasn't the only place stirring with change. Whispers from Cotton Bend drifted on the wind, carried by travelers and traders who passed the gate. Hank Sutter, a grizzled rancher with a limp, stopped by one afternoon, his wagon creaking under a load of hay. "Folks are talking, Jesse," he said, squinting under his hat. "Wonderin' who that girl is you brought home. Some say you're stirring trouble, taking in a gambler's kid." Jesse's jaw tightened, his gray eyes narrowing. "She's no trouble," he said, his voice like gravel. "And she ain't his." Hank raised a hand, conciliatory. "Just passin' word. Strange don't mean wrong, but folks like answers." Jesse turned away, his boots scuffing the dirt. He didn't owe the town answers, but the weight of their judgment settled like ash. Lena, feeding chickens nearby, caught the exchange, her small frame stiffening. She didn't ask questions, but her silence grew heavier, her sweeping more frantic, as if she could erase the town's doubts with a broom. That night by the fire, Jessie carved a small wooden horse, its edges rough but careful. Lena watched, her hands still. "You don't talk about her," she said suddenly, nodding toward the grave's direction. Jessie's knife paused. "Some things don't need words," he replied, his voice soft but firm. The next morning, Lena hummed a faint off-key tune as she scattered corn for the chickens. The sound stopped when she noticed Jessie nearby, her cheeks flushing. He pretended not to hear, but the melody lingered in his mind, a sign of something thawing in her. As he split kindling by the barn, the horizon glowed with the promise of spring, but the air felt charged like the calm before a storm. Cotton Ben's whispers were growing louder, and Jessie knew they wouldn't stay words for long. What shadows were creeping closer, and how long could this fragile peace hold? The Nevada spring of 1872 draped Cotton Bend in a fragile warmth, but the air around Jesse James's ranch carried a restless edge. The sun beat down on the weathered planks of the house, its tin roof glinting like a dull blade. Sagebrush swayed. In the breeze, and the cottonwood trees, now dusted with green, whispered warnings to the bluffs beyond. Inside, Lena moved with quiet purpose, her auburn hair tied back, her hazel eyes sharp but wary. At 12, she was still frail, her patched gray dress hanging loose on her thin frame, but her hands were steady as she scrubbed dishes, each motion a defiance of the fear that lingered in her bones. Jesse stood outside, mending a fence post splintered by the wind. His 40 years showed in the silver threads of his black hair, cropped close beneath his battered felt hat. His gray eyes scanned the horizon, his lean frame taut under a faded blue shirt and worn trousers. A brown duster hung nearby, swaying on a nail. He drove a hammer with precision, but his mind was on Lena. Her faint hums, her desert flower on, the grave, the way she swept the floor like it could erase her past. She was healing, but Cotton Ben's whispers were growing teeth. Midday brought the sound of hooves, slow and deliberate, kicking up dust on the trail. 3 riders emerged, their shadows long and sharp. Jesse set down his hammer, his jaw tightening. The first was a man in a preacher's collar, his face pale and stern. The second wore a deputy's badge, his mustache trimmed too neat. The third was Caleb Dawes, his gaunt frame draped in a tattered black coat, his pale blue eyes glinting with malice. His crooked nose and thinning blonde hair gave him a vulture's look, his smirk a match for the gambler who'd tied Lena to that. "Post Jesse James," the preacher called, his voice smooth as oil. "I'm Reverend Holt. This is Deputy Crane and Mr. Dawes. We're here about the girl." Jesse stepped forward, his boots crunching gravel. "She's got a name, Lena, and she's home." Caleb spat into the dirt, his grin twisting. "She's my brother's property, sold fair and square. You stole her, rancher." Jesse's eyes narrowed. "I paid his debt. She ain't a thing to be owned." Deputy Crane shifted in his saddle, his hand resting near his holster. "There's papers, James. Legal wager signed in town. She's bound to Dawes's kin unless you've got guardianship." Jesse's chest burned, not with fear, but with a cold resolve. "She's a child, not a mule. I ain't handing her over." Reverend Holt folded his hands, his tone pious. "The law's clear. Defy it, and you'll answer to more than us." Lena appeared on the porch, her small frame rigid, her hazel eyes locked on Caleb. Her auburn hair caught the sunlight, and her patched dress seemed to hold her together like a vow. "I ain't going with him," she said, her voice clear, unshaken. Caleb's smirk faded, his eyes narrowing. "You'll do as you're told, girl." Jesse stepped between them, his shadow falling over Lena. "She's staying. You got 7 days to bring your papers. After that, don't come back." The deputy's hand twitched, but the preacher raised a palm, his smile thin. "7 days, then. The Lord values obedience, Mr. James." Caleb's gaze lingered on Lena, a promise of trouble in his sneer. The riders turned, their horses kicking up dust that hung like a threat. Lena's shoulders trembled, but she didn't. "Look away." Jesse turned to her, his voice low. You did good, standing tall." She nodded, but her eyes stayed on the trail, as if she could see the storm gathering. Inside, the house felt smaller, the air thick with unspoken fears. Jesse sat at the table, sharpening his knife, the scrape of steel grounding him. Lena swept the floor again, her movements frantic, as if she could sweep away Caleb's shadow. "They'll come back," she whispered, pausing, her broom still. Jesse met her gaze, his gray eyes steady. "Let 'em, this is your home now." She clutched the broom tighter, her knuckles white, and nodded, a spark of trust flickering in her hazel eyes. That night, Jesse wrote a letter to a lawyer in Junction Bluff, an old friend who might know the law's twists. He sealed it, knowing it wouldn't arrive in time. As the fire crackled, Lena sat by the cot, her fingers tracing the wooden horse he'd carved. The ranch was a fortress, but not against men like Caleb Dawes. The bluffs glowed under a moonless sky, and the wind carried a warning sharper than coyote cries. What would those 7 days bring, and could Jesse keep the promise he'd made? The Nevada spring of 1872 turned restless, the sky over Cotton Bend heavy with the threat of change. Jesse James's ranch stood defiant against the bluffs, its weathered planks and patched tin roof a testament to stubborn hope. The cottonwood, trees, now green with new leaves, swayed in a wind that carried the scent of sage and something sharper: smoke. Lena, 12 and fierce despite her frailty, worked beside the barn, her auburn hair braided tightly, her hazel eyes scanning the horizon. Her gray dress, patched and faded, clung to her thin frame, and her bare feet left soft prints in the dust. She scattered corn for the chickens, her movements steady, but her heart raced with the weight of the 7-day deadline looming. Jesse, 40, and worn like the land he tilled, hammered a new fence post, his black hair streaked with silver, his gray eyes sharp under his battered felt hat. His faded blue shirt was damp with sweat, his scarred hands steady despite the unease gnawing at him. Caleb Dawes' threat hung like a storm cloud, but the ranch felt alive with Lena's presence. Her quiet hums, her careful steps, the desert flower she'd left on his wife's grave. He glanced at her, a spark of pride in his chest, but the sound of hooves snapped his focus to the trail. A lone wagon creaked into view, driven by a woman whose face bore the weight of a lifetime's sorrow. Mara, Lena's mother, stepped down, her frame gaunt, her dark hair streaked with gray, pulled into a loose bun. Her brown eyes, dull with grief, lit up when they found Lena. She wore a faded calico dress, its hem frayed, and leaned on a worn cane. "Lena," she whispered, dropping the cane and falling to her knees. Lena froze, then ran to her, their embrace a collision of relief and pain. "Mama," she choked, her voice breaking. "I thought you were gone." Jesse stood back, his boots rooted to the dirt, giving them space. Mara's voice trembled as she spoke, her hands cupping Lena's face. "They took me, sold me to a miners' camp. I fought to get back, but they said you were lost." Lena's hazel eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. "Jesse saved me," she said, glancing at him. Mara met his gaze, her nod heavy with gratitude. "I've got a place near Red Canyon," she said. "It ain't much, but it's ours. Come home, Lena." Lena hesitated, looking to Jesse, who nodded. "I'll see you settled," he said, his voice low but firm. They left at dawn, the wagon, rattling along a trail lined with scrub and rock. Jesse rode beside them, his brown duster flapping, his gray eyes scanning the bluffs. Mara's shack, a lean-to of tin and timber, crouched against a red rock ridge, its windmill creaking in the breeze. Inside, a single cot and a table held a child's drawing, a woman, a girl, a house, pinned to the wall. Lena touched it, her fingers trembling. "You kept it," she whispered. Mara smiled, weary but warm. "Always." But peace was fleeting. By midday, a haze crept over the ridge, the air thick with the acrid bite of smoke. Jesse stepped outside, his heart sinking as an orange glow pulsed in the distance. "Wildfire," he said, his voice taut. "It's moving fast." Mara clutched Lena's hand, her face pale. "We can't outrun it." Lena's eyes darted to the shack. Mama's papers, my book, they're in there. Jesse made the call. Get the wagon ready. I'll grab what I can. He tore into the shack, ripping open a trunk to find a bundle of letters, a scorched hymnal, and a small locket. He stuffed them into his duster as ash rained down, the heat pressing like a fist. Outside, Lena and Mara hitched the mule, their movements frantic. The fire crowned the ridge, trees exploding into flame, the sky choking with smoke. They fled, the wagon lurching as the blaze roared behind them. By nightfall, they reached a creek, its water a cold mercy. The shack was gone, reduced to ash, but Lena clutched the hymnal, her fingers tracing its singed pages. They camped under the stars, the fire's glow fading in the distance. Mara wept, her cane trembling in her hands. Lena sat beside Jesse, her voice soft. It took everything again. He shook his head, his gray eyes steady. Not you, not your mama. That's what matters. Lena nodded, her auburn hair catching the moonlight, a flicker of hope in her hazel eyes. As the creek murmured, Jesse's thoughts turned to the ranch. 7 days were nearly up, and Caleb Dawes wouldn't wait for ashes to cool. What awaited them when they returned, and could they outrun the flames of the past? The Nevada spring of 1872 dawned clear over Cotton Bend, but the air held a bitter tang of ash and betrayal. Jesse James's ranch, nestled between rugged bluffs, stood scarred but unbowed, its tin roof glinting under a sun that offered no mercy. The cottonwood trees, green with new life, swayed as if mourning the chaos left behind. Jesse, Lena, and Mara returned to find devastation. Fence posts charred, the barn door splintered, the house defiled with overturned chairs and a single word scrawled in charcoal on the door: thief. Caleb Dawes had come in their absence, his vengeance as deliberate as the wildfire that took Mara's shack. Jesse, 40 and weathered, surveyed the wreckage, his black hair streaked with silver, his gray eyes burning with quiet fury. His faded blue shirt clung to his lean frame, and his brown duster lay folded inside, a relic of a life he'd nearly lost. Lena, 12 and fierce, stood beside him, her auburn hair loose, her hazel eyes hard as flint. Her gray dress, patched but clean, seemed to carry her resolve, her bare feet steady on the scorched earth. Mara, frail in her frayed calico dress, leaned on her cane, her gray-streaked dark hair falling from its bun, her brown eyes wide with dread. "He won't stop," she whispered, clutching Lena's hymnal, saved from the flames. Jesse didn't answer, his boots tracing boot prints in the dirt. 3 men, 1 limping. Caleb's work. He knelt, finding a broken knife blade, its edge dulled by malice. Lena stepped forward, her voice steady. "They want me scared. I ain't." Jesse met her gaze, a flicker of pride cutting through his anger. "Good," he said. "We'll fix this. Together." They set to work, Mara sweeping glass, Lena stacking wood, Jesse hammering new planks. The ranch began to breathe again, but the horizon held its breath, waiting. By noon, hooves sounded, not Caleb's but neighbors'. Hank Sutter, grizzled and limping, arrived with a sack of nails and a nod. "Heard what happened," he said. "Ain't right." Behind him came others, a widow with blankets, a farmer with stew, a boy with wire. They worked without questions, their hands rebuilding what Caleb sought to break. Lena watched, her hazel eyes softening as if seeing trust for the first time. Mara sang a soft hymn, her voice trembling but clear, and the ranch pulsed with a warmth that defied the ash. As dusk painted the bluffs crimson, Caleb Dawes rode in alone, his tattered black coat flapping, his blonde hair thin and greasy, his pale blue eyes glinting like a snake's. His crooked nose cast a shadow as he dismounted, his smirk a blade. "Quite the party," he sneered, eyeing the crowd. "Think you can keep what ain't yours?" Jesse stepped forward, his gray, eyes cold. "Lena's no one's property. She's family." Caleb laughed, his hand hovering near his belt. "No papers, no claim. She's mine by law." Lena moved before Jesse could, her small frame darting to Caleb. Her hand cracked across his face, the slap echoing like a gunshot. "I don't belong to you," she said, her voice deadly calm. "Never did." The crowd froze, tools still in their hands. Caleb's cheek reddened, his sneer twisting into rage. "You little," he started. But Jesse was there, his presence a wall. "She's braver than you'll ever be," he said, his voice low, final. "Leave, or you'll answer to all of us." Caleb's gaze swept the crowd, Hank's steady stare, the widow's clenched fists, the farmer's raised hammer. He spat, mounting his horse. "This ain't over," he growled, but his voice broke, his retreat swift. The dust settled, and Lena's shoulders shook, not with fear but with release. Jesse placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch light. "You did good," he said. She nodded, her auburn hair catching the fading light, her hazel eyes bright with something new. Freedom. That night by the fire, Mara spoke softly. "You could stay, Jesse. Make this permanent." Her brown eyes held hope, her cane resting against the table. Lena looked up, her hymnal open, waiting. Jesse paused, his scarred hand still. "Let's get through spring first," he said, but his smile was a promise. Lena grinned, handing him a slice of bread she'd baked, crisp, warm, hers. He took a bite, raising an eyebrow. "Not bad," he said. She laughed, the sound filling the house like a song. For those who love history, this tale reflects the 1870s Nevada frontier, where communities were forged in hardship and family was built on choice, not blood. Towns like Cotton Bend thrived on gossip and greed, but stories like Jesse and Lena's show how courage and kindness reshaped the West. If this moved you, hit that like button, share it, and subscribe for more tales of love and redemption. Drop a comment. What makes a family to you? Nevada Frontier. Historical romance. As the cottonwoods whispered under a starlit sky, Jesse, Lena, and Mara sat together, a family born from ashes. But what new stories would the plains write for them?